On the last episodes, I mean, we did a bunch of episodes on this incredible book. I will repeat the name, The Ovum Government, and you can get it anywhere that your platform allows you to. On the last episodes, can we go back and tell me what we touched in the previous episodes briefly?
Okay. Well, basically, what we said previously is that, first of all, governments, even the military, have never resolved the problem of war. So we should not rely on governments to resolve the problems of war, because they basically profit, just as like the military. You know, there are crazy people or people who lose the reality and they want to go to war. Usually they go to war with smaller nations so that they think they're going to win. And so then things get complicated. And who suffers are the people, the common people. They have to, not only they have to pay with their own children's lives, but also with their wealth, because they have to sponsor. And God forbid they lose the war, they become basically slaves for the next 20, 30, 50 years because they have to pay the debt.
Right.
So I came up with an idea that perhaps we should not rely on governments. We should rely on a constitution, which is a legal document. I'm not advocating revolutions and all that, not at all. We are peaceful people, and we want to go towards peace. So will resolve the problem of war with peace resolutions, peace agreements. So I came up with the idea that perhaps if we were to institute a constitutional amendment in the U.S. or a national referendum in other countries, then we could let the government avoid war, or at least limit the government from having the power to go to war so easily. They would have to ask the people before they go to war by vote if the country that is considered the enemy is the real enemy or is considering a threat to our nation.
On that note, let me refresh our audience, because this is a podcast. Pro, you can't see us. Pro, you can on YouTube. But in the cover of the book, it's called The Ovum Government. Again, I will describe what we have. We have some eggs in an ovum. Can you describe can you describe the cover?
Yeah.
And explain why this cover is like this?
The picture depicting the book, it is very significant because it shows in the forward picture a table. Usually politicians open up a table to discuss world's affairs. Mm-hmm. And in there is a container, an egg container, which if you look closely, you will see these are not eggs, but they are eggs representing nations. For example, here you have the eagle, which represented the U.S. You have the bear in the back representing Russia. China is represented with a dragon. And also there is the English lion. So these are represented nations, potent nations.
There's a Germany, right?
There is an eagle there in the background, which is Germany in a sense. Right. But Germany today
is small. It's a small egg.
It's a small egg. And so the container basically wants to tell that we can contain our governments. Mm-hmm. One by one, but we have to do it because otherwise we're going to continue with wars. And once wars were basically a sport, I say in the book, it were basically a sport where
you talk about that,
because soldiers and kings, they went to war because they wanted to gain a little town or a little. But today, with the nuclear weapon, we are attempted to basically to destroy ourselves, humanity, and even the other animals that inhabit the earth. So you can see there the table with the eggs, and then in the background you will see that there is the sky and the atomic bomb explosion comes up, that means either we contain our governments or we are going to have to face destruction. And we don't know, once a war starts, like the one we are presently witnessing in Ukraine, of course, where the Russians are even threatening that if we bother them too much, we don't allow them to take over Ukraine, they will use weapons of mass destruction and dirty bombs and nuclear weapons. So it is us, the people, that have the power to restrict our own government, never mind what the Russians are doing. We in the U.S. we should limit, constitutionally, of course, our own government so that it cannot go to war that easily. Because if we leave it to the people in power, they will go to war. They gain by making war because they think they're going to win and they win prestige. They go into books of history. The military become more generals and all that because without war, the military don't really count. So that's what I think the picture of the book represents. And if you do it closely, I think it represents very well the content of our book, or my book.
And on that note, I mean, I don't want to give it up. You guys have to listen to the previous episodes to understand what Vito is saying right now. And I encourage you to listen to them very carefully before you hear this last one. In this last episode, what we're going to bring into today, what you're going to tell us?
Well, it's a wrapping up, basically, episode. And I'll be talking about the profits or the benefits that the Ovum government will give us if we adopt that kind of government, which I said it's very easy to obtain just by vote. It's constitutional, no war, and no abuse of power. We just limit the government.
Let me ask you something.
Yeah.
Who are the critics on this? I mean, who will be the critics on
Yeah, well, basically, the world was divided into four during World War II. There's the Yalta Conference, and then there's the Cairo Conference in 1940, where basically they instituted four policemen that divided the earth into four, which were the U.S., England, China, and Russia. China was not represented in Yalta, but they were considered to be a power, imminent power, because of the mere size of the people and inhabitants. So they were and they established a sphere of influence, nations that were part of the influence of the U.S. or the influence of China and Russia and England. So then thereafter, this was 1940, but in the classic critic that came up with world order was Henry Kissinger. Basically, he respected...
What year were we talking about?
In 2014. Now we are 2014.
With
he published
Kissinger.
the book World Order.
Okay.
And he gave a history of the world order, how it came about. Basically, he says the world powers established a power of influence not only, but also a balance of power, meaning there are different powers with agreed upon sphere of influence, and these nations would respect one another, but govern their own area that they were dominating, or at least they were the bosses. So these people, the government that the power, the balance of power was basically a European idea which said that, especially with the Westphalia War, after 30 years of war in Europe, the nations agreed that with religion you had to accept the Protestants and the Catholics. Each nation would do whatever they wanted, free to, and not influenced by the church. So therefore, this balance of power was established. At that same time, also, they established the national interest, which later on we'll see it's coming to damage, to hurt people. But anyway, after that, basically I can say there are many, many people who gave the idea of how the influence, the world order should be.
And you're proposing an Obama government. Now, will a government like this diminish or eliminate aggressions and wars?
Well, first of all, I have to say aggression. What constitution aggression, we don't basically know, okay? What constitution defense, we basically don't have come up with a clear idea of these two principles. So what happens is, you must have heard that they say the best defense is the offense. So what happens is that people take action. If they fear that you may come to my house tomorrow to kill me, I will come before and kill you before you kill me. It becomes self-defense. In fact, we can say, for example, the Romans destroyed Carthage because they felt that nation or that city was basically taking over the commerce and in a sense put in parity with the Romans. So when they went there, they destroyed it completely.
Just in case.
Just in case. The Israeli, for example, in 1989 or 81, basically they went. They took their planes. They went to Iraq. They crossed all the countries. They went to Iraq. They destroyed an atomic plant there, or fuel, energy, whatever. They said that this is self-defense, even though the world condemned them, but it was a self-defense. I don't want to take you out of there, but is that based on fear or facts? It's fear. Mostly, also facts, obviously. If you have a conflict with a nation and you see the pressure is increasing, you have a motive to worry. But basically, it's fear. Nations fear. Well, we say fear, but the way I see it, it's not fear, it's insecurity. It's the opposite of security. We have national security and we have national insecurity. And it is this insecurity that provoke people to go to war before. And so what happens, we have wars even unnecessarily. They decide to go to war for preventing another war. And so they go to war. And so we are at war all the time.
And how do you bring commerce into all this? I mean, yes, we can
in a world in which, let's say, 2 or 3 nations, they don't have to be all nations of government, but basically 1 or 2 or 3, as commerce is not obstructed by the new type of government. In fact, it will help enhance it. For example, today we have this freedom. The U.S. has established this, and the English have established the free access to all type of commerce. Mm-hmm. If you don't, like Japan did, we have the right to go to war and open up the market because at that time we felt it was good for us to do so, that we opened up the market. But what happens is, by doing that, you become an aggressive nation, even though you don't want to recognize it, obviously, but you become an aggressive nation. And that you take over by imposition or by war, and not...
Let me give it you like a real scenario. Like, okay, you have oil, so I don't have it. I go to war and get your oil. Will be that an example? Of
either you go to war and take it. If you say, no, you cannot have it, or... we discuss the price,
That's commerce.
That's commerce. In the sense here, the question you asked is that we should have commerce. At the moment, you go in because you need to, and it doesn't matter. If you don't accept, we go to war. But in the Ovum government, it would be sort of an agreement in which, let's say, the example that I
give me an example.
Yeah, in the book is, for example, if the U.S. produces 70% of the shoes business, he will need 30%. So what happens is at that point, the government becomes involved, only at that point, and says to the world, we will buy 30% of our needs for shoes.
Okay.
Once that 30% is complete, it stops. Because at this point, the U.S. production of shoes is protected. At the moment, for example, the production of shoes is not protected. So what has happened in the last 20, 30 years? Do you see any American shoes, really shoes? No, you can see sneakers. But so the thing is, business is obstructed and hindered. For example, China wants to sell us, but it doesn't want us to go in. In a sense, they are being protective of their own, which I think is
they're doing what you say. I mean, they're protecting.
They are protecting their own business. For us, in the past, we felt that opening the market, we will sell more. But now, lately, we have begin to realize that commerce can hurt us, destroy our industry. We have noticed that with President Trump that says America first. So we are beginning to change. Not only that, with the Ovum 19, we have noticed some of the products we rely on China. We don't produce anymore. But in the Ovum government, the commerce would be internationally open and would be free for nations to do commerce. But at one point, the government can come in and say, I only need 30% of shoes. I don't need 100% of shoes to ruin my country or my production of shoes.
Now, you're talking about shoes, but if we talk about something more essential like oil or food, that becomes more important for a government. I mean, I need to feed my people. It's
basically the same thing. If the government needs you need, let's say, 10 pairs, and you only produce 5, you need 5. So you have to. The government thinks ahead in order to provide to its people what it needs. It can be anything, everything from automobiles to car to anything that we need.
But they're also at this point, and correct me if I'm wrong, international treaties and international. How in your idea, how will you replace those treaties, or what would you do?
If you notice, the treaties are instruments by which two governments get together and say, okay, I agree to do certain things, and you agree certain things, and we accept. And so it becomes law. Basically, a treaty, even by the U.S. Constitution, is the law of the country. So these are very serious instruments. But what happens in reality? For example, remember we spoke about Iran and U.S. signing a treaty, international treaty on the atomic energy, and it comes Trump and he says, no, this is not valid anymore. Look at what happened, for example, in 1939-40 when there was World War II.
Right.
Russia and Germany had signed a treaty, an international treaty, that they would not invade one another. What happened? China, Germany. Germany just went in there and started a war. So what value has an international treaty when at the moment you really need it, it doesn't serve the purpose? So I came up with an idea that perhaps the authorities, we could establish authorities. With authorities, it's an entity which is given a specific amount of power, and even you can make law. And so what happens is that this specific authority is basically authorized to do certain things in one area only. For example,
Let me stop you there.
Yeah.
Don't. I think we discussed this before. Is that the authority of the United Nations, or not?
no, not I'm talking about outside of
Outside the United Nations.
each government can establish an authority as it needs to. For example, take space exploration.
Okay.
At the moment, basically, everybody can go to the moon and establish a post there. Okay, the U.S. went there in 1969, and yes, and they said we are taking from mankind. So what happens is when China goes and the Russians go, they don't say anything. But there's a danger that, for example, now the Virgin Exploration, SpaceX, these are private individuals. What happens is these individuals go on the moon without respect to the governments. They take over and says, this land here, I came here and it is now mine. They can claim it, and nobody can really stop them. So what is happening is that we're going to start creating wars that we say we claim that the moon, part of the moon belongs to China, or part of the moon, the other part belongs to the Russians. This can create a problem. But if there is an authority that is, let's say, space exploration authority, then we would have to go according to the rule. Whether you are Chinese or you are an American, you have to follow those authorities because there is an authority on space exploration.
And it's not that what is happening or what is ending to happening in Antarctica?
Well, in Antarctica, it's also at the moment everyone has grabs. We don't have conflicts because it's cold and nobody goes there. So, but the idea of the authority is very important because, first of all, it does not interfere with sovereignty. Nobody can say, well, because you have a space exploration, it deals with my authority as a nation. So sovereignty is protected by that. Not only that, but with treaties, the governments do that, the government and government. And who controls the treaties are people in government. And as we know, people in government, you cannot really basically trust them because if they want to go to war, they go to war. It doesn't matter what treaty they have signed. But if with the authority instead, the country or the politicians or the elected officials do create an authority. But after that, it switches from the official country into a specific authority. That means it is now controlled by experts, not by politicians.
So, in other words, you're saying who elect the authority? Who decides who the authority is?
Well, the nations themselves. For example, let's say we want commerce and we create an authority. I have good business, U.S. has good business with China, so there is an authority between those two nations. Mm-hmm. These two nations deal with business, but eventually other nations can come in and enlarge the authority, the commerce authority, so that they can deal with business. But the government is not involved actively. Only when it says restrictions, you can come in and sell me 30% of shoes, but no more than that.
Is that similar to the European Union? Similar in a way or not?
No. The European has a different problem. It began for economics to share because they had so many wars. Here, it's not the free market that was created. It was not really free, but it was for the Europeans specifically. This is an authority which, once it's created by the government, it becomes controlled by experts in that field.
Got it. And how can a Novum government become a reality? explain me that. How can we move forward? Okay, we understand all these facts. We read your book. We know all the history about it. We know the practical benefits of this. How can we, from now on, what do we do?
Okay. That is where activism comes into play. This is where the people themselves have to organize in a certain way to cause a national or U.S. amendment. Now, this, we have done it in the past, so we know how to do it. It requires people to become active and say, we want our government to be limited in the question of war. Because if we don't do that, we're going to be destroyed. Even the U.S. government is good-willed. They want peace. They don't want war. Yet we are at war all the time. So something is wrong somewhere.
And you're always talking about the U.S., but when you try to explain this to, let's say, a country that, like Saudi Arabia, that it's controlled by a family, how do you implement this? I mean, how you all go forward?
How far is that family in power? It is still by the will of the people, or they don't say anything. If they are controlled and they are family related, basically because there are not too many people there, so they are related to one another, and so there are few people. But as a nation grows, it's impossible to be family dominated. There could be a revolution. Usually that's what happens. People revolt against their own country and they have wars, or they have they revolt and they have a revolution. And so therefore the government falls and the new government is born. Now, I don't advocate that because that's the extreme. Usually that's what happens, though.
Yeah, so when you say that people get together and ask for change, how they do it? They go to the street, they go to the internet, they write letters. What do you asking the people to do?
Well, for example, take the environmental movement. Today, everybody is worried about the environment. So if you really want to become involved, you call one of those organizations. I don't want to mention organizations, but you can join, and then you say, listen, having a government which advocates peace or guarantees more peace for our country, we should work towards that and create. Or it's very easy to create new organizations. Basically, I can call a meeting of citizens in my own neighborhood, and even if 10 people show up, you can say, okay, we want to organize a peace movement, and they say yes, so they vote, and you create one. It's a matter of interest and intent, but it can be created. There are nations at the UN. The UN is also an institution of peace, but it was not born on a political basis. It was controlled by the governments, and now we know a government has a veto power, and it stops on your tracks. The moment you want to do something, let's say a war happens. Look at what's happening, for example, in the Ukraine and Russia. The UN is stopped. The UN cannot proceed because Russia says, forget about it. I take care of my problems. You are not involved. And so the US does the same thing. When we went to Iraq in 2003, we said to the Iraq, even though the UN said, this is illegal, what you're doing, we still went and got to war. So every nation basically respects, but they want to control their actions. And so it comes a point where I say it is the people that control the government. At this moment, for example, a nation has total sovereignty. If we want to go to war, we go to war. Nobody can stop us. They can judge us. We can lose the war, but nobody can stop us. But internally, we, the people that are basically the owner of a land, the owner of the government, can say to our own government, say, I don't want you to go to war. Stop doing the war, or at least ask us before you want to go to war. And so therefore you slow down the process of making war.
Okay, so you're asking common people like me that the next time I go to vote to ask to my representative, basically, are you against or in favor of war? Even though I know that they're lobbying.
Limiting war of aggression. That is basically. Now, let me go back a minute. When we say limited war, we are not against the military. We are not against weapons. At the moment, there are many institutions or organizations that say we don't want war armament, period. How can a government eliminate weapons when there's so much fear around? You know, the U.S. could be, for example, the U.S., but you can talk about Russia or you can talk about China. They fear that if they disarm themselves, their people will come and invade them, as it has happened in the past with China, for example. They have it. Once you lose a war, forget about it. You become basically a slave.
Right.
You have to pay. So by saying limiting power of government to have war of aggression, you are basically saying limiting war of aggressions only. We do allow weapons. We do allow the military. Without the military, we have no guarantee of peace or protection. So we need the military. The fact is, we have to change our government first. And then as the government reduces the chances of having wars or fearing wars and invasions, then slowly the weapons production will be diminished.
Okay. I know it's clear. It's clear. Now, we reached the end of this series of this book. I mean, you have to read the whole book. I mean, you have to go online and buy it and understand what veto means. Any final message, Vito, that you would like to tell the people before or after buying the book of how to use the book and how to go forward? Any personal final message?
There is a chapter that says at the end how to proceed in order if you want to become involved. Even without joining other organizations, other movements, you can start individually and locally, because that's the way peace movements do start. They have always historically started, and they are in opposition to the government. Not necessarily you want to take the government down, but because you feel the government should change in certain areas. And I suggest we are in great danger of being annihilated by our own government. So our government becomes our own worst enemy.
Explain that. Why?
Simply because it takes us to war. Let's say the Russians today. The Russians went to war in Ukraine without really participating, without really knowing. Why? Because the Russians thought that they would go in, walk in, and in 2 days finish the war. And look what has happened. Now, the U.S., for example, has responded in something that perhaps the Russians did not expect. No, the world is expecting, because we're going through economic and political upheaval now. There are many governments being changed because of the Ukrainian. And so it is important that you become involved, because it is your house that you are dealing with. It is your freedom. Eventually and ultimately, it is your freedom, and it is you personally are involved in keeping that freedom. You must act.
And on those words, I will thank you, Vito. Again, Vito De Simone, the Ovum government. Go buy it. Think about it and act, as Vito says.
And I want to thank you specifically because you have been so kind and all throughout this time.
I will follow up on this, and I expect everybody to read it and make comments of this. Thank you, Vito.
Yes, please make comments. Thank you.